being at events like this one today, where we're talking about trying to help parents do things other than spank, I sometimes feel like I shouldn't stop doing research about it, because it seems like we kind of know it's not good. And why am I still doing research on it? We should probably just move to that next step and just do the advocacy and focus on human rights. Because the more we do research on it, it seems like there's still an open question about whether there are negative effects on children. And so I have some mixed feelings about the fact that I still am doing this research. And so I was just thinking today, maybe these next few papers will be kind of the last ones I do for a while, and I will turn my energies on this topic more towards really trying to help change people's attitudes more, both the public generally and policymakers, that the research is really pretty definitive. We don't really need it anymore, and I don't need to be contributing more to it. There have been some objections to the idea that corporal punishment or spanking or physical punishment is always associated with negative child outcomes in the research. And the objections to those conclusions have mostly come from people who think that the kinds of physical punishment we've been studying include abusive techniques. So we're not restricting it to everyday spanking, that we're including things like parents who hit their children with an object or something like that, and arguing that that's abusive. And my response to that is, well, a quarter of Americans still use objects to hit their children. And if a quarter of Americans are doing it and not going to jail for it, it must be still part of what Americans define as acceptable physical punishment. And so to me, that means that's fair game for studying physical punishment. The other argument has been that we can't draw causal conclusions about this research because it's what we call correlational research. We have amount of spanking and we have child outcomes, and we look at the associations. And we can never know for sure if spanking causes these negative outcomes, because we cannot do an experiment, which is the scientific, it's kind of the scientific gold standard, that if you can do an experiment and randomly assign people to two different conditions, then you can see if condition A or condition B has different influences. Well, obviously with children, we can't do that. We cannot randomly assign children to parents. We cannot randomly assign parents to spank. So we can't do that. So what do we have? We have lots and lots of research across this country, across the world, looking at the effects of corporal punishment on children, or the associations, I should say, that corporal punishment has with negative child outcomes. It's quite consistent. It's consistent across countries, across cultures. To me, it's incredibly consistent and compelling. And there's very few things that are that consistent in science and social science. And given that we can't have an experiment, I don't think we're never going to get more evidence than what we have. We're just going to have more and more studies that find that there's only negative things associated with spanking. And I don't think we need more of those. So unfortunately, there's a few researchers out there who hold the belief that the research does not support the conclusion that spanking is bad for kids. But they are in the minority. They are a very small minority of social science researchers and medical researchers. Almost all researchers are on the side of, we know physical punishment is bad. There's no evidence that it's good. So I think if I could tell parents the most important conclusions about the research, it would be that number one is that it doesn't work. Parents do it because they think it works, because they think it makes their children more compliant, teaches them right from wrong. And spanking in and of itself does not do that. All it does is delivers pain, and that gets the child to stop what they're doing right then and there, because any adult would stop what they're doing if somebody hit them. But it doesn't do any of the teaching that we know is necessary for children to learn how to behave appropriately. So what spanking is very effective at is getting children's attention. And that's the only thing it's effective at. But there are many, many other better, safer ways to get children's attention. And so when parents say spanking works, it's not spanking that works. Spanking got the child's attention. What works is all the things parents say to children, all the messages they convey, the facial expressions they have, that convey to the child what you did was wrong, it was dangerous, and here's what I want you to do instead. Those are the things that we know teach children. The spanking in and of itself, all it teaches is that the parent can harm them. If they don't want to get hurt, they need to avoid the parent. And if they want to do the thing they got hit for, they just need to do it when the parent's not around. So they will avoid their parents. And that's not what parents want to teach at all. That's the opposite of what parents want to teach. And so the more we can say these messages to parents, hopefully this will start getting through, that it's actually counterproductive to what they want to achieve. And we know that it also, spanking and physical punishment also does not promote long-term appropriate behavior. Again, because children haven't learned. Spanking in and of itself does not teach appropriate behavior. One of the main reasons parents tell us that they spank is because their child has aggressed against somebody else. They've been aggressive, and they want to punish that behavior. And the irony, of course, is that they are exactly doing the behavior they're trying to get their child to stop. And many times, I'm sure many of us have seen parents hit a child and say, don't hit your brother or don't hit your sister. And they don't see the contradiction in what they're saying, that they are actually modeling the very behavior they want their children to stop. And our behaviors speak very loud and louder than our words when we're parents. And children see that, and they learn that if you're bigger and stronger and more powerful, you can hit. And that you can try to get what you want if you're bigger and stronger and more powerful. And those are the very children who go to the playground and use that same lesson to get what they want out of other children. And it just continues through childhood. And they learn that they can always be aggressive and powerful. And that's not the lesson parents want. That's the last lesson we want as parents. And that's what I would like to make sure parents are aware, that they may not be consciously doing this, but that's the lessons that children are picking up, is that they can use aggression to get what they want. I think there's definitely a connection between the bullying behavior we see on the playground and how children are treated in the home. They're learning that bullying message, that they can use bullying as a tool from somewhere. They're either learning it from other peers or they're learning it from their parents at home. That if someone who is bigger and stronger and in a position of power, and they can use physical force to get what they want. And so sadly, what that probably means is those children are being coerced, physically coerced at home. And they see that their parents are doing that because they're more powerful, and if they want things on the playground, they will start doing that. And so in order to change bullying in the schools, I think we need to address this issue in the home, that parents are using a form of bullying with their own children. They would never see it that way, but by using power and force to get their children to do what they want, they are bullying them. And it's a conversation that's hard to have in this country, but I think we need to have that and see that the correlation between those two things, that they're the same behavior, but for one, in the playground we call it bullying, but at home we just call it discipline, but it's really the same behavior. So the other possible reason that spanking might lead to lower IQ is that it might actually affect the brain of children, and it might traumatize the brain. And there's been some research that shows that children who have been spanked have higher cortisol reactions, so they have higher stress in the brain, in their chemistry, in reaction to stressful situations. And so their body has been primed to respond to stress in a very anxious way. And those responses will carry forward throughout their lives. And we know that children who have been traumatized with abuse and things like that have permanent changes to their brain. And so the fact that we're seeing this with quote unquote everyday physical punishment along the same line of what we see from really severe physical abuse suggests that spanking is having some of those same negative effects on the brain, that's traumatizing the brain. And so there haven't been any studies linking this for sure yet, but I think this is a possible way that spanking might have these effects on kids' IQ and cognitive abilities. I definitely get the perspective, or I often get that kind of argument that, oh, we're liberal academics in the ivory tower, we don't know about what it's like to be a real parent, and that we are liberals that have an axe to grind about children's human rights and things like that. I am completely honest with people that yes, in fact, I don't think people should spank their children. I have come to that conclusion from a variety of perspectives. I came at it originally from the research, and I actually didn't know when I started this research whether or not the research was conclusive or not, because no one had ever really looked. But I felt like I was reading enough about the research that showed there were negative effects, and so I thought, someone's got to look at all of this. But nobody had, so I did, and found that overwhelmingly, the research that I have not done myself, I didn't do any of the studies that I summarized in my meta-analysis paper, almost all of them found negative effects or negative associations with corporal punishment. And so it's so compelling from a research point of view that it started to change my mind and make me very passionate about this fact that it is bad for kids. There's no evidence that it's good. And I cannot stand by and let people keep thinking that it's okay, now that I know that it's not. And so I feel obligated to get the message out to as many of the public as I can that it's not okay. Children do not have equal protection under the law. They can be assaulted legally by parents and oftentimes by teachers in 19 states. But no adult can be legally assaulted. And so that perspective for me kind of trumps all the research, that it's a human rights issue. It's a fairness issue. This should be, I would think all Americans would be upset about the fact that children are being treated so unfairly. I kind of do have an axe to grind, and I'm not really ashamed of that I feel so strongly about this that I want to speak out about it and try to help people understand both the research end of things and the human rights arguments, to kind of come out of my ivory tower and talk with people about it. And so an argument for preventing child physical abuse, is to remove physical punishment from our repertoires as parents altogether, so that we won't resort to that when we're angry. And in fact, when you look at parenting programs for parents who have been accused of abusing their children, and those accusations have been sustained, and the court says you have to go to this parenting class, those parenting classes invariably tell them you can't use physical punishment anymore. You have to find another way of disciplining your child so that you won't be in a situation where you might hit too hard or for too long. And I think that's true for all parents. All parents are bigger and stronger than our children. And so, at least until they become adolescents. And so all of us have the capability of hurting our children without meaning to, just because of our size. And so we should just never even go there, because there's always the risk that we could injure our child without meaning to. That they were raised that way, and they think they turned out okay. And so they don't want to be told that their parents did the wrong thing with them, or that they've done the wrong thing with their own children. And so they don't want to hear that message, because they want to believe that their parents loved them and did right by them, and that they love their own children. And so being told that they did the wrong thing that's not consistent with what they believe about themselves or their parents. And so, and there's also a belief in American culture that family is a sacred and private institution, and that parents should be able to raise their kids however they like. And that comes from a belief that was codified in law for many years, that children are the property of their parents. And as property, parents can do whatever they want with their children. And that is still kind of how we treat children in this country, unfortunately. And so I think parents feel, well, I have the right to do whatever I want. No one can tell me to do anything differently. Not academics, not the government. This is how I want to do things. Banning spanking in the home in the U.S. is a tricky question. I think we are very far from that in this country. I admire the 29 countries that have banned all corporal punishment, including in the home. And that is definitely a way to send a message that the government doesn't believe in hitting of children and wants parents to do other things. And most of the laws in other countries are educational. The idea was to express to the public that the government thinks you should not be doing this and you should do other things instead. The goals of those laws are not to put parents in jail. That's the last thing the government wants to do. Taking children and parents away from each other for spanking is not the goal of these laws at all. And so I think that there's some misperception about that. And in the United States, whenever a ban is talked about, people think, well, that you're just going to separate families and you're going to put parents in jail. And that's just not the point of these laws at all. But I think in the U.S., we are very far from considering that. I think I'm much more in favor of education campaigns to prevent the use of it in the first place, and educating parents about alternatives, and really trying to redefine the notion of spanking, that it really is hitting. We use a euphemism for it, but it really is hitting. If you did it to an adult, it would be assault. We just need to call it what it is. I would be happy to see that conversation start in the United States, to get us starting to reframe what it is that we're talking about, that we're really talking about violence. We're not talking about discipline. The more aggressive children are, the more they elicit spanking from their parents. But we also found out that the more children are spanked, the more aggressive they are over time, that they increase in aggression. And that's the same for white parents, black parents, Hispanic parents, and Asian American parents. It's the same across all of these groups. And so to me, that's a pretty strong finding with this very large nationally representative sample, that there's no difference in the effects, the negative effects of corporal punishment on children. What is different is there are differences in the frequency with which different groups use it. I think if we as an American culture stopped hitting children in the name of discipline, that we would see a lot less aggression in our children. That we would see them, we would see bullying drop, we would see aggression among siblings drop, because children wouldn't be learning aggression as a way to behave. They'd be learning more appropriate strategies. I think if we could teach more parents how to use positive discipline to encourage children to make appropriate choices and take responsibility for their behavior, that we would see a more responsible culture that would be more caring and more empathic and thinking about other people. Because a big portion of what positive discipline tries to teach is thinking about other people's perspectives and the effects that our behaviors have on others. And I think if we did that more as a culture, we would have a more empathic culture, and we'd have children and adults who care about other people more than we do now, I think. I think it could have really widespread effects on how our culture treats each other, both how we treat children and how we treat other adults, that there'd just be more, that's my vision, is that there'd be more empathy and more understanding and more respect for each other. And that would just translate into all of our relationships and into our politics and everything.